If there is so much content that you can find online, then why is Hollywood full of empty lots and unemployed writers? Hi, what's up, everybody? So the other day I was watching Conan O'Brien's podcast, and he was having this really interesting discussion about how just Hollywood seems like a ghost town. But at the same time, you find just probably thousands of new shows, new movies on these streaming platforms. And so the question is like, okay, so what is happening exactly in Hollywood? And I think the conclusion, at least that I came up with as I was thinking about this, is like it's just so much bureaucracy. There's so many rules that are being implemented for this award show or for this studio or for the union and this, that, and the other. And so there's less emphasis being made on creating a good story and more emphasis on let's follow the rules. Let's make these new rules and make sure that we enforce them. And so, yes, it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but instead of having more creators, more writers, more directors, more producers, you just have more administrative people making sure everyone is following the rules. Like my big question as I was hearing Conan talk about all this was, where is this generation's Stephen Bochco? Who, if you don't know who that is, he was the brain behind Homicide back in the 80s and early 90s, NYPD Blue, like these very seminal cop shows. Where is this generation's David E. Kelley, who back in the 80s, was a writer for LA Law and then went on to create Ally McBeal and The Practice. And most recently did Goliath with Billy Bob Thornton on Prime, which was great. But at the same time, those guys did great things. But who was the generation afterwards? Aside from Taylor Sheridan, can you name anybody else who is, really, doing a lot to create great shows and great movies? Can't really think of it, And even at CinemaCon, there's a clip that's been going around that I saw where at CinemaCon they're interviewing, a panel of producers, one of them being Jerry Bruckheimer, who's been around forever and has produced some of the best and most fun movies and TV shows of all time, including and especially Top Gun 1 and 2 and CSI. So dude's done great things, but the man's in his 80s. Where's the next generation after that? Who from the things that they produced, the writers that came up through them, producers that came up through them, who is continuing the mantle? And I think that lack of, nurturing this talent is the reason why you don't find any of it anymore in Hollywood. Anyone that can even get anything at all, they're not staying there. They're going somewhere else. They're going to Georgia, where Tyler Perry has his studio. They're going to Shreveport, where 50 Cent has his. They're going to Europe, And so if that's where they can get the gigs, then why are they going to stay in Hollywood? Back in the day, and this was kind of what the writer strike was also about, is that back in the day, a season of any series had 20 plus episodes, and there would be a writer's room of like 10, 12 people, and then they would divvy out. They would come up with the grand vision of what the season was going to look like, and then task a writer or two to, okay, you're going to write the first episode, you're going to write the 10th episode, you're going to write the 15th episode. So they would divvy out everyone's responsibility, so everyone had constant work. And especially when you have 20 plus episodes, you made a really good living. Now, can you name any series that has more than 10 episodes? So you need less writers. But then if you need less writers in Hollywood, what about the other guys? They're going elsewhere to do things. So if they're not in Hollywood, then they're not living there, they're not spending money there, and so the industry just little by little just starts to crumble, as it has been doing for a while. And there's also, like I said before, the bureaucracy of it all. Conan tells a really, revealing story that's kind of indicative of this entire point, where he's done a great job at being a host of the Oscars. I think he's the perfect kind of Oscar host. But as they were, talking about, how are we going to, present this? What are some of the bits and skits that we're going to have during the show? And he had this idea of like, okay, he's going to be backstage, laying on the ground, surrounded by all these golden retrievers. And then they let him know, okay, you're up. And then he stands up, jumps up really quick. He gets dusted off by people with lint removers, and then, goes out on stage. It's a pretty typical Conan O'Brien type of skit. And so when he presented that, they're like, oh no, that's gonna take a while to do. And he's like, what are you talking about? Oh, well, the dogs got to live with each other for a certain amount of time. And then, so the dogs have their trainers and owners that they also have to live together. And, it's just like all this work and, all this money. And apparently it was like, a cost of like, I won't want to speculate exact numbers, but close to around $50,000 for this, 5-second thing that has to be done. And he's comparing that to back in the day when he had his own talk show, where they would come up with an idea at 4:30 and then at 9 o'clock be filming it so that it can air later on in the middle of the night. And so once you have all these obstacles and barriers to the creative process, then it's like, okay, I'm going to take my talents elsewhere where it's not so obtrusive, where people are going to let me do what I do without all these rules and regulations that on the surface don't make any sense to me, even though you can probably make an argument for it, but it's just impeding the creative process in the end. Anyways, those are just my thoughts about it. What about you guys? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Smash that like button, click follow, and I'll see you guys next time.